All right. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. And welcome back to the Legendary Woman series. My name is Coach Monique Beck, and I'm coming to you live and direct from my office. Today, I'm going to be talking to you guys about and continuing the series that we have been teaching on, which is called Why You Need a Financial Game Plan Going into 2023. And so please forgive me. I am a little bit under the weather, but to God be the glory. I am pressing through anyhow because I believe that consistency is important, and it's important for me to get this information out to you all. And so I pray that you've had an amazing day thus far, that you've had some time to praise and worship the Lord our God, Jesus Christ, and that you are home and settled. And even if you're not home and settled, to God be the glory for life on today. Okay, how about that? And so I'm going to continue on with point number 3, but just to serve as a recap. We talked about 2 reasons already on Friday and Saturday on why a financial game plan would be crucial and critical for 2022 and beyond. I know we're focusing on 2023 because we're less than 30 days, 30 days away from 2023. And so why not have a plan and a strategy in place to ensure that we are on track, that the target is not a moving target, okay, but it is a target that we can absolutely hit and conquer as we're going out and working hard and making things happen for our families, making things happen for ourselves, making things happen for our ministry, our community, so on and so forth. And so just by way of recap, on Friday, we talked about you need a financial game plan because you work hard, right? You already work hard. You're already doing a lot of stuff. You're going to work, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and you want to make sure that the money is not being gained in vain, right? You want to make sure that that money is being put in the proper places, because it's nothing like paying a bill twice, right? That it was only due one time, but you paid it twice because it was late, right? And then it got late fees, and then it got shut off, and then you had to turn it back on, and it was all started at $100. But now here it is, it's up to $200 because it was disconnected. They had to come out to reconnect it. You know what I'm talking about if you've ever had anything disconnected. And so we are not about doing double work, but what we want to do is be very accurate. We want to be very accurate the first time so we can get those results and get where we need to be. The second one was because your family needs stuff. Right. And so our families, the people that are connected to us, the people that look up to us are depending on us to come through. Even if they are not in our immediate family, trust me when I tell you that when you're growing up and you're in your family bloodline, right, and you look around, you're looking around in your family for a champion. You're looking for someone who has broken the mold, who said, you know what, the generational curses stop with me. My family is no longer going to experience this or experience that because this person decided that they were going to do the work that was required. They were going to do the work that it was going to take in order to take the family to the next level, right? And so when we look around for a champion, oftentimes you are the champion, but we have to be the ones that are going to do the work and do what it takes so that our families don't have to suffer. Because how many people know that generational curses are very real? And people are born into stuff. Sometimes we are born into stuff and not knowing that it was a spirit of poverty that rested on our family bloodline, right? That rested on our family name. And so it's going to take someone, a trailblazer, that's going to say, no longer will my family be in poverty, but we are going to be wealthy because that is God's portion for us. That is what God wants for us. And I am going to do the work. And so even though they may not be connected to us, even though we may not know them right now, we're talking about our children's children. They're not even here yet. But man, when they get here, right, they're going to say, man, great grandma had it going on. Right. She had her ducks in a row. She made sure that there was enough money even for me to go to college. She made sure there was enough money for my parents to do what they needed to do to buy a home, cash, or whatever the case may be. And so even though we may not know who those people are in our family, trust me, your family is depending on you. Your family is depending on a champion to rise up and say, I am the one, and you don't have to find another. Okay. And so the point number 3, which I'm very excited to share, is this. Because the longer you stay in debt, the longer you are in bondage. That's what we're talking about tonight. That's why we need a financial game plan, because many of us are in debt, right? And because we're in debt, that almost feels like oppression. That almost feels like depression. That almost feels like slavery. That feels like bondage. And so I am going to take the opportunity to read an article, because I don't want it to just be what I'm saying. I don't want it to just be what's coming out of my mouth, but I want you to hear what others are saying in the financial industry, understanding that being in debt is a real problem for us. See, we live in America. We live in the United States, where everybody wants everything quickly. We don't want to wait. We don't want to really pay cash. If we want to go buy a house, we want to go buy the house now. We don't want to have $150,000 for the house. We want to get the house now, which we'll see the sticker price will say $150,000, but we know that that's not the real price. That's the cash price. But when you're going out to get a mortgage and to buy a home, you got to understand that the cost of borrowing money is interest. And so by the time you get done borrowing the money, depending on whatever your interest rate is going to be, then you may very well pay for that house 3 times because of interest, because of private mortgage insurance, because of all the other things, the isms and schisms that come along with purchasing that house. Now you got to pay somebody's commission for helping you get that mortgage. We talking about it's a lot. Okay, so it's not just $150,000. And so we're talking about, why do you need a financial game plan? Because you don't want to be in debt. The longer you in debt, the longer you are in poverty. One thing that I always talk about is the fact that as long as you owe someone money, their hands are constantly in your pocket and you don't have anything. You don't own anything because you owe them. And even your future income is already predetermined, because you have this mortgage, because you got this car note, because you got this loan. And when we go out and get loans, and listen, nothing against loans, because people do get those, but it's a matter of not staying in debt any longer than what I have to. But when we go out and get those loans, then we are entangled with this situation, or we are under contract, which would be a better word, for maybe 30 years. We're under contract for 6 years. We're under contract, right? And if anything happens, then they're going to come back and make good on their end of the contract, which means that if I don't pay, they're going to take it back. It doesn't matter how much money I put into it. They taking the whole thing back if I get behind too much in my payments. And so being in debt is oppressing. It is depressing, but we don't have to stay in debt. We don't have to continue to, pay all this high interest if we don't want to. The fastest way to get out of debt is simply paying your bills. It's simply paying it off. Okay. And I truly believe that God will meet us while we are in the process of paying off our debts, because the Bible says that God will give us the desires of our heart if we delight ourselves in him. And so if my true desire is to become debt free, and I'm found in the place where I'm doing all that I can to get debt free, I believe that God would honor our press, that God will honor what we're doing, and he will actually come through and potentially forgive that for you. To potentially tell them you don't owe that anymore. But for many of us, what we're doing is we're running from that problem. We don't answer the phones. We don't open the letters. Trust me, I've been there. I understand. Okay. We don't open the letters. We don't answer the phone calls because we don't have any money. We don't check out credit score because we don't want to see the damage that is taking place, because we understand that we don't have any money to address it. But for anyone, so when we see people like, hopefully I get this comparison right, because I just thought about it. So let's say, for example, when you see the world, right, and the world is running this way, then maybe it's possible that we should be running the other way. Definitely as people of God. we got to be running toward God. We understand that, right? But we can't go where everybody else is going, or we're going to get everything that everybody else is getting. And these United States are in heavy debt. Not only the people, but the government. And so where do you want to be in 10 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? Do you want to be debt free? Do you believe that God wants you to be debt free? The Bible talks about in Romans, the 13th chapter and verse number 8, it says, "Owe no man nothing but to love him." And so what is the nothing? That's everything else. Money, right? We want to make sure that we are fulfilling our obligations. So if we say we're going to do something, we want to do it. So I don't want to owe anybody any favors. I don't want to do any of that. I want to be clear. I want to just go ahead and go about life and don't owe anybody nothing but to love them. Love is a commandment. And so I want to make sure I'm found doing that. But I don't want to owe anybody any money, because that puts me on the hook for however many years until I figure out a way on paying that back, and maybe paying that back with interest and fees and liens and everything else that comes with it. All right. And so let me read this article really quick. And I don't know if I said this in the beginning, but I am a finance coach. I am your family finance coach. Okay. I am your legacy coach. All right. And so I just wanted to put that out there so you know who I am. And I'm not just on here talking about money. Okay. I am a licensed coach. And so here it is. Let's go into this article. It's called, "What Does It Mean to Be in Debt?" This was published back in 2021. And so let me begin reading. I'm going to be looking that way. So just so y'all know. So most adults, no matter how frugal or financially savvy, are carrying some kind of debt. Actually, a good number of kids may be carrying debt too, if we're counting advances on allowances. Okay. Between car loans, mortgages, student loans, credit cards, medical bills, and so on, if you're participating in society, you've probably got debt. Okay, so we know that student loans is one thing. And of course, they told us, listen, student loan debt is good debt, but they still will garnish your Social Security to get the student loan payments. I don't know if you realize that. I didn't know that until I became a part of the financial industry. Okay, but just because you're carrying debt doesn't necessarily mean that you consider yourself to be in debt, right? Which raises the question, exactly when do you go from simply having debt to being in debt? Honestly, there's no correct way to look at it. There are, however, 3 criteria that can help you decide if you've just got debt or if debt's starting to get you. Okay, if debt is starting to get you. Okay, so your debt's eating too much of your budget. This is another section of the article. A healthy financial ecosystem requires a balance of give and take. In other words, money comes in and money goes out. That's all perfectly normal. We're talking about a budget here. And debt can be perfectly healthy. Debt can be a perfectly healthy part of that flow. The question, though, is whether or not your debt is consuming too much space in your budget. All right. And so let me tell you this, 70% of the money that people spend every single day is spent on a financial product. And so just imagine if you can save money on the financial products that you're already using on a monthly basis. Could you get out of debt sooner if you allocated that money in the proper positions? That's the question for you. And so let me continue reading here. That's too much, it says, okay? There's no hard and fast rule, but 36% is a popular rule of thumb. What that means is that you don't want your non-mortgage debt payments to account for more than 36% of your income. Of course, the cost of living varies depending on where you live, and so it may be easier or harder to carry more debt depending on what your other costs look like. But generally speaking, if your debt to income ratio is nearing or exceeding 40%, that's a warning sign, and you may well and truly be in debt. Now, debt is debt. I'm going to just say that. Debt is debt. If I owe you $1, if I owe you $1,000, if I haven't paid you yet, I am in debt. So even though this article talks about the 40% rule, at the end of the day, if you owe anyone money, you are in debt until it has been paid. All right, or forgiven. Okay, and so your debt is costing you way more than it's getting you. Let's read this part. Quite a bit of debt is a form of investment. A house is an investment, and I will not say that I agree with that. It really depends on what type of house we're talking about. A college education is an investment, right? If you can pay that loan back, okay? If you can pay that loan back, because there are trillions of dollars of unpaid student loans that are out there right now. We know that our government is right now trying to forgive some of that. But for most people, for many people, I won't say most, I would say but for many people, and definitely for Black women, we are the most educated. So I would have to imagine that we have most of the student loan debt in those trillions of dollars that are out there. That is not $20,000 is not going to address $100,000 of student loan debt. Definitely, if you were not in a position where you were a public worker, right, where you were a teacher or something of that nature, where your loans could potentially be forgiven, depending on how many years you were in that position, in that working in that capacity. All right. And so that's another thing. They say a car is an investment. I might not read this article all the way through because a car is not an investment. A car, let me say this, okay? When you purchase a car, when you purchase a car brand new and you roll off the lot, that car has depreciated in value so many thousands of dollars because it's not an investment. A car is not an investment. Anytime I have an investment, I want my investment to grow over the course of time, not be a liability to me forever and ever. How can it be an investment if it's also in a liability where I'm always going to have to pay car insurance, where I'm always going to have to pay gap insurance, where I'm always going to have to pay for registration and tags and all of those things? See, how can a car really be an investment? Because after a while, it depreciates in value. And so investment should be going up, not depreciating in value. And so it's going to be going down over the course of time, all the way down to zero eventually, right? And so how could it really be an investment? I might have to cancel this article because I'm not feeling what they're talking about being in the financial industry. Okay, so let me see what they're saying. And I really wanted to do this because I know that sometimes people Google things. They Google things that are out there and they take it for what it's worth. But because I am a licensed finance coach, I'm going to be doing some critiquing as well as I'm reading this article. Okay. So ideally, the money we spend should come back to us in some way, either as more money, yes, as good health, as peace of mind, as increased opportunities, etc. You may not like the amount of student loan debt that you're carrying, but if it helped you to land a high paying job, you probably don't think of it negatively. Let me put a cap on that and say this. When it comes to student loan debt, I think that for the majority of people that go to get those loans and go to college, they do have an idea that they're going to be able to get a high paying job or maybe even a business. And I'm going to tell you what, the people who are in those college admissions offices, they do a great job at selling that loan to you. They do a great job at selling that program to you. And they show you even statistics. They show you, that these jobs pay X, Y, and Z. But there are a lot of prerequisites that come into place when it comes to you, particularly you getting that job. They don't consider the racial thing, right? They don't consider that you are a woman. They just consider, well, you should be able to get this job. But there are the powers that be that could still prevent you from getting the job that you want. And so that is not a guarantee that when you go to college that you'll be able to get a good paying job. Let's just be honest. Because if that was the case, we wouldn't even be having this conversation right now. Everybody would have the money that they needed because almost everybody went to school. That is what we have learned in the society that we live in. We learn to go to school to get a good education so we can get a good paying job so we can live our dream life. But we know that doesn't work out for most people. Okay. And so I'm going to wrap up with this article. Okay, this section is called Your Debt is Consuming Too Much Mental and Emotional Real Estate. I think that is very true. I'm going to read that. Finally, you don't necessarily need an equation to determine if you are or aren't in debt. You probably already know simply based on how your debt makes you feel. Do you think about your debt regularly? All right. Do you worry about your debt? Enough to read articles about whether or not you've technically in debt. Yeah, it doesn't matter because debt is debt. Do you fantasize about a life without debt? A healthy amount of debt shouldn't give you heartburn, and it shouldn't be something you think about much more than once or a month or so. More than once yeah, they messed that up. Okay, great. No matter what the numbers say, if your debt is sticking with you and causing you regular distress, that's enough to say that your debt is a problem. Ultimately, being in debt is more about whether or not your debt is preventing you from living the life you want. If your debt is a barrier to better options or a weight that's keeping you from making progress, it doesn't really matter what you call it. It just matters that you get rid of it. That I agree with. And so, yes, we do want to get out of debt. We do not want to stay in debt. I want to read you just a couple of quotes that I found on debt, which I found very interesting. And so I couldn't find who quoted this, but it says, debt is the slavery of the free. Debt is the slavery of the free. And where is the land of the free? Here. The United States is supposed to be the land of the free, right? So debt is the slavery of the free because the majority of people that live in the U.S. are in debt. They are in debt, okay? So here's another one. Chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. That's by Warren Buffett. Let me read that again. Chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. So we're talking about our habits. And for some of us, not all of us, but for some of us, we are in debt because of our habits. We got a habit of not paying off our bills. We got a habit of going out to get what we want, whether or not we have the money or not. We go out and get it and we make a way and we don't care about the consequences. See, the chains of habit are too light to be felt until they are too heavy to be broken. Being in debt, you feel it. You feel the pressure because they're constantly calling you. And you can block, so many numbers that you want, but they're going to keep calling you and sending you letters and threatening you and maybe sending a garnishment to your job because you owe them money. And of course, maybe you want to pay them, maybe you don't. But at the end of the day, our name should mean something in the earth. We want our name to be good in the earth. We don't want it to be said that we go out and do something and then we don't make good on our promises. And that's really what it is, right? So it's better to make a vow than to make a vow and break it. And sometimes our habits will cause us to do that intentionally. We're going out and we're getting into debt knowing that we're going to be filing bankruptcy, knowing that we're not going to pay it. And that is manipulation. So we got to be so careful about this thing called money. We got to be so careful about this thing called debt because debt literally puts us in bondage and we want to be free. Okay. Okay. So I love this one by Nelson Mandela. It says, it always seems impossible until it's done. Okay. Have you ever had a lot of debt that you were trying to pay off? Like myself, I was in that position. Have you ever had a lot of debt that you were trying to pay off and it seemed like a mountain that you would never be able to get around? And sometimes it's easier to ignore the problem than it is to face the problem. But it's just like we talked about earlier. When the world is running away, we should be running in the opposite direction if we want something different. Right? So if there is a fire that is happening, I'm not gonna, if it's my house, right? Why would I be running away from the fire other than to get to safety? I would want somebody else to run to the fire, right? I would want them to put that fire out for me, but I can't just get in the car and go to work and act like the house is not on fire. And so it needs to be extinguished. It needs to be dealt with. There are some things that I need to get out of that house. I want to protect my investment. I want to protect the thing that I got. So I don't want my house to burn down. I don't want anybody else's houses to get on fire. But that is what happens when we stay in debt, because some of our debt can be passed on to our family. And so we don't want that, right? We don't want our family to be having to pay for our poor choices or what we didn't do here. And so we want to make sure that we take care of that and handle that. And one great way to do that while you are building your legacy, while you are trying to get out of debt, you want to make sure that you have something that's called life insurance in place. Well, what is it about life insurance and debt that would even work hand in hand? So if you are a wife, right? If you are a husband, you have a family, or you guys are a couple and you're doing life together and you're building a life together, you have debt, you got debt, we got this house, we got a mortgage, and now we're just going about and we just living our life. One day somebody dies. Well, the house was moving and advancing because it had two incomes in it. But life insurance gives you the opportunity to have income replacement. And so when one of the breadwinners passes away, there can be a lump sum that is given to the survivors. And that money can last them, depending on how they spend it, for 20 years. It could last them for 10 to 15 years. And they wouldn't have to worry about that. So do you think they could figure it out in 10 to 15 years if something happened to you or something happened to your spouse? Could you figure it out if you had 10 or 15 years worth of their income still in the house? Well, that's what happens with income protection. And so that's another thing that will allow you to rent wealth until you have it for yourself, while you are maximizing your debt freedom and paying down your debt. Now you got the opportunity to also have that income protection in place just in case. All right. Just in case you never make it to the end of that bucket. All right. Here's the last quote I'll share with you, and I'm going to wrap up. You will either learn to manage money or the lack of it will manage you. That is a quote by Dave Ramsey. And so you will either learn to manage money or the lack of it will manage you, by Dave Ramsey. Okay. And so we got to get a hold to this thing. It is now unacceptable for us to say that we don't know anything about money when the resources are available to you every single day.